Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming out for, I think, this really interesting event that is dear to my heart. I want to start by acknowledging that we are gathered here on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and that's the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And these nations have really taken care of this land for many years, and we have so much to learn from them about how to do proper stewardship of our land and our planet. So may we learn from them. I want to now just move on to the agenda, and you've seen the names of the presenters. I am really thrilled to have such a great group of people who bring such different perspectives to this issue of our diets and how they affect the climate. And we're going to talk about really can making changes in your dietary patterns have an impact for climate change? Does it really make a difference? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I thought I'd start by just introducing myself and my background. I'm Dr. Charlyn Black. I am a professor in the School of Population and Public Health at the University of British Columbia. I started off as a medical doctor, and as I was doing my medicine, I read Diet for a Small Planet, and that convinced me to become a vegetarian after finishing medical school. And of course, as I practiced medicine, I could see all sorts of problems for patients, did coursework, ultimately did training in public health. But I was an early cohort that didn't have 4 years of training. My supervisors told me to get lost and find something to do, so I ended up doing my doctorate at Johns Hopkins in health policy. So I ended up in a research career where I was studying what I now call our disease care system, patterns of health and health care. And it was in 2018 that I saw the movie Forks Over Knives, and I just went, wow. What are we doing in our medical care, disease care system? So that really harkened back to my reason for wanting to go into medicine, which was to prevent disease and create health. And it's been a passion of mine ever since. So this is the first thing I've organized. I'm thrilled that you're here, and I hope we all learn something. And what I think has inspired me and inspired this, putting this talk together, is it's called the Eat Lancet Report, which points out the links between diets that promote human and planetary health. And I think this statement was just so powerful. Food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. Could that be true? The single strongest lever that we have? So we're going to talk about that. However, food is currently threatening both people, human health, and our planetary health. And we face an immense challenge to provide a growing world population with healthy diets and sustainable food systems. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Klaper. And let me just introduce him. He's a very interesting fellow. Many of you have seen his work. Michael is a gifted clinician, an internationally recognized teacher, and sought-after speaker on diet and health. And he actually began his medical training here in British Columbia. So he's thrilled to be back here. He's practiced preventive and nutritional medicine for more than 4 decades and has served, and I heard a great story about how he served as a nutrition advisor to NASA's programs for space colonists on the Moon and Mars. He also serves on the Nutrition Task Force of the American Medical Students Association. And his passion and he works tirelessly, I can attest to, is he's the founder of Moving Medicine Forward. He makes trips around the States, everywhere, to try and get medical students to understand how powerful food as medicine can be, how it can not only prevent, but it can reverse the many chronic diseases that plague our society. So he is one of the foremost clinical experts on how to use food and lifestyle to take one's health to the next level. And I'm going to plug his nonprofit organization, Moving Medicine Forward, where he works tirelessly. I can tell you he's always working. So Michael, please come up and give your talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Black, for the introduction and for the invitation to address this lovely audience and the wider audience who's going to be viewing this on video after this event, because the topic couldn't be more important and more relevant, and I applaud you for bringing this to all of our attentions. As you just heard, I invite everyone. I'm going to be showing you some slides. There'll be some figures that'll be interesting, as well as some organizations you may want to contact. I invite you to take pictures of the screen and track down these resources as the presentation proceeds. As you just heard from Dr. Black, after a 50-year career as a primary care physician, earned most of my paychecks in emergency rooms, operating rooms, urgent care clinics, general practice offices. As much as I love suturing wounds and setting fractures and delivering babies, retail medicine is dealing with people one at a time. We've got a far more urgent need of healing this entire planet, our society, etc. And so I realized that the acupuncture point for me to direct most of my energies where we could get the greatest effect is to reach the medical students who are learning how to diagnose and treat diseases, to inform them that the majority of diseases they are going to devote most of their medical career treating is largely due, when we're talking about the obesity, diabetes, clogged arteries, high blood pressure, inflammatory diseases, they're largely due to the standard Western diet that our patients are eating. That's why they're sitting in front of us, overweight, diabetic, hypertensive, clogged up, and inflamed. And if the doctor understands that and gets this patient to a plant-based dietitian to get them on a truly healing diet, most of these diseases go away. And every medical student should know this. And I was thinking to myself, somebody ought to be telling the medical students this. And the little voice on my shoulder said, how about you, Doc? And so I've been spending the last 4 years going from medical school to medical school, delivering this message that giving a lecture, what I wish I learned in medical school about nutrition, and to tell them it's the food your patients are eating. Start there, and most everything gets better from there. And I want to reach the medical students before pharmacosclerosis sets into their brains. And so far, they've been very receptive. And if you want to learn more about what we are doing, I invite you to go to our website, Moving Med Forward, down here, and you can learn exactly about what we are doing. If you want to support our work, we are a nonprofit, very nonprofit organization. I'm mostly financing this out of my own checkbook. Any contributions would be greatly accepted. That said, one of the things I tell the students is that in the middle of my career, I joined the staff at True North Health Center in Santa Rosa, California, about an hour north of San Francisco. And there, people would come in with the classic Western diseases, obesity, hypertension, clogged arteries, diabetes, etc. But instead of raising their insulin dosage and giving them more beta blockers, we put them on a diet based on whole plant foods. Every breakfast had a big selection of oatmeal or porridge, I guess, and fruits, etc. Every lunch had a colorful salad and hearty vegetable soup, big plates of steamed green and yellow vegetables, and hearty vegetable curries and stir fries and no cheese burritos, lots of fruit for dessert. This was the food stream that we would have our patients run through their bodies meal after meal, day after day, week after week. So some would stay there for 3, 4, 5 weeks or longer. And the changes in these people's bodies that we saw were just absolutely jaw-dropping. I was never prepared in medical education for the dramatic improvements in the human body that were so evident from the patients who adopted these lifestyle and dietary changes. Within days, the obesity begins to melt away. It doesn't magically all disappear overnight, but they lose a pound or two a day on a plant-based diet. Their arteries begin to relax and dilate and open up. This lowers their blood pressure, increases blood flow, bringing oxygen and nutrients to capillary beds throughout the body, the brain, the heart, the kidneys. It's an anti-inflammatory diet. People's joints stop hurting, their aches and pains, fibromyalgia, et cetera, gets better. With all the fiber in the beans and the lentils and the fruits and the vegetables, these folks have their first good bowel movement in years, and it brightens their entire outlook on the universe. It's very dramatic to see, very, very gratifying for the doctor. Their eczema, their psoriasis begins to clear, acne gets better. The asthmatic folks don't wheeze so much. The sinus headaches go away. The migraine headaches get better. They get a better night's sleep. And as their blood pressures go down, their diabetes gets better. We can start reducing the medications these folks are on. We get to learn the wonderful skill of deprescribing. We learn how to deprescribe medicines for blood pressure and for diabetes control. What an exciting way to practice medicine, to get people healthy. I'm the happiest doctor I know. My patients get healthy, unlike most of my colleagues. It's a wonderful, wonderfully gratifying way to practice medicine. And we see this remarkable phenomenon of actual disease reversal. I practiced medicine 40 years before anybody put these two words in the same sentence for me. But I wish someone had told me in medical school that high blood pressure is reversible, that type 2 diabetes is reversible, that lupus is reversible. These are reversible diseases because they are largely diet-based. When we talk about reversibility, what are we talking about? We're talking about remission of clinical symptoms. Their joints stop hurting, their skin clears up, their lungs stop wheezing. But also their laboratory values normalize and their inflammatory markers come down, their lipid values get better. So it's a real thing. There's now an international journal of disease reversal, and it's an exciting new chapter in medicine. And as I became a student of plant-based nutrition, over the years, I began collecting medical journal articles validating that this is an appropriate approach to medicine. And I just gave a lecture today to the medical students at University of British Columbia, and I spent a solid hour going through the mechanisms by which a whole food plant-based diet will reverse clogged arteries, relieving angina and leg pain when they walk, exactly how a plant-based diet reverses type 2 diabetes, where the insulin receptors are all clogged up with fat from the diet. The fat dissipates and the insulin receptors open up and people get off their insulin. Because a diet on whole plant foods is mostly fiber and water, that's what these vegetables are. You're basically filling your belly up with fiber and water. The calorie density is so low that you can't really hold weight on a purely whole food plant-based diet, so people get leaner without having to count calories or restrict carbohydrates. Arteries relax and dilate, so high blood pressures come down. You can get them off their medications. The inflammatory diseases, lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, these often get much better. We get dramatic responses in these kind of conditions. The standard Western diet is a major irritant to the gut wall, and these chronic curses of Crohn's disease and colitis that just take over people's lives. We find they get much better or go away altogether on a diet based on whole plant foods. Again, many types of inflammatory arthritis get better. The asthmatic folks don't wheeze so much. Their skin conditions get better. And again, there's a solid literature and a growing one validating the scientific mechanisms behind these clinical improvements. I could wax poetic about the beauty of and the power of plant-based nutrition to reverse these diseases, and again, it's usually the focus of my lectures. But that's not what this evening is about. And I leave the medical students with a very clear directive and understanding, and telling them, because the med students, they so want these medical tools. They want to learn how to use diuretics to make the edema go away. They want to learn how to use antibiotics to clear up that pneumonia. And those are wonderful medical tools that every young physician needs to learn how to use. But I make it absolutely clear that a diet based on whole plant foods is arguably among the most potent healing modality that any physician can ever wield. It's the difference between actually healing the patients or just managing their chronic diseases. And I say, you want to learn the medical tools? This is the most powerful one you will ever have access to, and I urge them to use it to the greatest extent possible. So this is what I've been spending most of my time doing, but I also make it clear to both patients and the medical students that as important as all this is, and you want to avoid the strokes and the heart attacks and the leaky gut and all of that, there are bigger issues involved here than our cholesterol levels and our blood sugar numbers and our waistline measurements. I'm most concerned about my biggest patient, my most important patient. My waiting room has expanded to take in this magnificent creation, because I'm responsible for this patient as well, because she's not doing well. If she were a medical patient, I would notice, first of all, she's running a fever, and her temperature is up. Her digestive powers, her soils are poisoned and having a hard time recycling her nutrients. Her circulatory system is all clogged up. Her rivers are polluted and silted up. And her carbon dioxide level's going up. She's in respiratory failure. She needs to be in the intensive care unit. You bet she needs intensive care. Absolutely. We've been dreadfully bereft of caring for this ultimately most important patient. Because her temperature is continuing to go up, the rate of global warming is increasing, and I tell the med students and the public who are listening to these lectures, it doesn't matter what your cholesterol level is. If we don't have a habitable planet to live on, none of this other stuff is going to make any difference at all. And we really need to start focusing, and that's why I'm so glad Dr. Black has organized this evening to bring our attention to this. So why is all this happening? Why is the Earth getting hotter? My colleagues are going to be presenting the science behind this phenomenon. I don't want to steal their thunder. I'm just here to give a general overview. But why is this happening? Because before humans, basically before white men, decided to cut down the trees, there used to be 6 trillion trees on planet Earth. In the last 500 years, we have cut down half of them. We've cut down 3 trillion trees on planet Earth. Why have we cut down 3 trillion trees? Absolutely, we build houses, we burn a lot of wood-burning furnaces, etc. But by far, the main driving force for cutting down all these forests is to grow animals for their flesh, to eat them. And the land is largely used to make way for grazing land so the animals can graze, or by growing the grains and legumes to shovel down their gullets by the metric ton to feed them. This is where the forests of North America went. Now, granted, we're in Canada tonight, I agree, but just to show you the rapaciousness. Before the white man got to the North American continent, the forest cover was a good almost half of the continental United States. By 1850, we had decimated a good third of it, and by 1920, most of the eastern forests were gone. It used to be that a squirrel in Maryland could jump up in a tree and jump from tree to tree to tree to tree and never touch the ground until it came out in the prairies in Minnesota. Those forests are gone. That land is now growing corn and soybeans to shovel down the gullet of hundreds of millions of cows and pigs and chickens. We have traded our forests for cheap government-subsidized cheeseburgers. And you've done it here too. And let's not kid ourselves what the majority of land area in your wonderful province is used for. The interior is largely used for beef cattle. There's mixed dairy production along with beef production further south in the interior and along the coast, of course, and certainly in Vancouver, there's a large, in the GVRD, there's a large dairy production operation as well. Once the forests are cleared, they want to come back. The edge of the forest, the oak trees and the pine trees drop their seeds, and then the tree and the forest want to come back. But not to the cattlemen. Don't want that forest coming back there. So what do? Let's burn the forest and make sure it doesn't come back. This is a NASA satellite photograph of the fires that are burning on planet Earth on any given day. And you can see the constant burning that takes place in order to keep reforestation from happening. We are cutting down the Amazon rainforest at a rate of a football field of area every second. And I just read that now the Amazon rainforest is now a net emitter of carbon dioxide rather than an absorber. And they're having a drought in the Amazon now, just like they're having a drought here. It's happening in the Amazon because we're cutting down the trees that used to call in the water. The rate of global warming is increasing. The Earth is indeed on fire. What are we doing about it? Well, what any natural, proactive Homo sapien would do, that's what we're doing. And the Canadian forests, which used to be carbon sinks and take carbon dioxide out of the air as the trees grow, they have become so dry and so diseased with bark beetles, and so much wood is taken out of those forests that eventually burns or rots and releases carbon dioxide that the Canadian forests are now net emitters of carbon dioxide. Back in 2000, less than 20 years ago, the forests of Canada were taking in more carbon dioxide than they were letting out. But again, the droughts and the beetles and the logging have reduced the forest sink, and in 2018, the forests of Canada have become net emitters of carbon dioxide and making the global warming situation worse. And again, we perpetuate the problem year after year by burning the forest, keeping the forest from coming back. It compounds the original sin of cutting down the trees by preventing the reforestation, because as the trees grow, they take carbon dioxide out of the air and turn it into solid wood. They reverse global warming. I have to be amused, sadly, about the carbon capture technology that they're devising in Iceland to take carbon dioxide out of the air at something like $1,000 per metric ton. Where Mother Nature's come up with the greatest carbon capture device of all. They're called trees. And yet we would rather have cheap cheeseburgers than the forest that used to be here. So what's the answers? Wherein lies hope? Francis Moore Lepage said, hope does not come from calculating whether the good news is winning over the bad. Hope is simply the choice to take action, do something already. What in the world could we do? What can be done? 3 things: educate yourself, transform yourself as far as your diet and your lifestyle practices, and then Organize yourself, magnify your power. Educate yourself. I urge you, if you have not encountered Glenn Mercer's wonderful book, this is 60 pages long, you can read it in an afternoon. And he lays out the case for the connection between our food and our climate problems just beautifully and humorously. He's a funny writer, but the subject is not funny at all. I urge you, you can download it onto your Kindle off Amazon, and as I said, read it in an afternoon. And I urge you, if you really want to understand this, go to the website of Dr. Richard Oppenlander called comfortablyunaware.com. His book is just superb. Comfortably Unaware, right where the meat and dairy industries want us. Just keep eating those burgers. Don't worry about what they're doing to the planet here. Just Oppenlander makes it very clear that the scope of this problem is so great. You can put solar panels on everybody's house. You can give an electric car to everybody on planet Earth. Unless we change our diet practices and pull back on our meat production and consumption, let those forests come back, nothing is going to make any difference. And if you've not read this classic book, Diet for New America by John Robbins, he spells out the case just beautifully. Another way to educate yourself is subscribe to this wonderful 4-leaf program. Every week you'll get a newsletter from the author here that was one of just the most incisive and powerful writer. Jim Hicks he's an engineer, but he's rightfully concerned about the plight that we're in. And please go to the website called Climate Healers and see what Dr. Sailesh Rao is telling us. If you want to know what to do, where do I go? Go to climatehealers.org and check out what he is saying to us. So, won't drag this out too long, but here's the most important thing. The land that it takes to give one person a meat and dairy-based diet takes 2 football fields of land. That same 2 football fields planted in corn and potatoes and fruits and vegetables would feed 14 people. And that's the difference. If everybody went vegan overnight, it would free up a land area the size of Africa. And we'd only need a quarter of that to grow food for everybody. The rest of the land would let the forest come back, and it would easily absorb all the carbon dioxide that has been released from fossil fuel burning. When that happens, everything would change. The forests would come back, the soils will stabilize, the rivers run clean again, the oceans will heal, the global warming will reduce, world hunger will be extinguished, and we can stop killing each other over food and water, all for the simple expedient of choosing the bean chili instead of the beef chili, just going to a plant-based diet. So the message is the time to stop eating animals has come. We have used animal eating up. We have used fishing up. Enough. It's time to turn the page already. Well, what about the farmers and ranchers? They're going to throw them off the land? No, they are our brothers and sisters growing our food. Help them. You don't have to run cattle on the land. If it can grow grass to feed cattle, you can grow hemp, you can grow broccoli, you can grow fruit trees, do something else with the land and help these people, pay them to learn how to grow new crops, buy their equipment, give them crop insurance, send their kids to college, put internet in their house. Help these people. They're not the enemy. They are growing our food. Meat eating needs to become as uncool as wearing fur or smoking cigarettes. So, you're not alone. Look around. There's some organizations that can help you. Check out Canadians for Responsible Food Policy. Go to their website. And the Vancouver Humane Society has a very strong plant-based message as well. Definitely worth supporting. We need some magic, but we've seen magic before. When I grew up, the Berlin Wall was the biggest, scariest, most permanent threat to freedom going. But 20 years of blue jeans and Beatles music and Western trade, we saw that wall come down on a weekend in 1989. We saw Nelson Mandela walk out of jail and become the president of his country. We've seen magic before. We can We have seen many things that we thought we would have forever, from typewriters to dial telephones to real tape recorders, gone. Okay? When they're not serving us any longer, it's time to move past. Well, raising and slaughtering 80 billion living creatures every year on this planet and eating their flesh should be one of those practices. We used to do that. Ooh, can't believe we ever did that. Let's move on to plant-based diets. So the paleo folks who say everybody should be eating meat 3 times a day, I say, are you kidding? What about these children and the world that they are going to have to inherit? They deserve a better future than that. It's not just about us. It's about them. I'm working for them. I'm working for the animals and the kids. And they're the main reason why I'm teaching medical students about healing with plant-based nutrition, because I know that every plant-based doctor that we can help open their mind to it, to recommend plant-based diet, not only means fewer animals going to be eaten, but there'll be more room to let those trees come back and start stabilizing this ecosystem. So I'll ask, what's on your plate? Just all our futures, that's all. It really makes a difference. What can you do? You can adopt a whole food plant-based diet. That's the first thing to do. So do what you can, where you are, with what you have. If you want to help us, you can go to that QR code. And I really appreciate you for being here, for caring enough about this subject. If you need to make a move, start getting plant-based meals into your daily fare in every way that you can, whether you're out in the restaurant or pushing that cart down the supermarket aisle. What you put in that basket really makes a difference. Make it plant-based, and we'll create a healthier future for us all. Thank you very much, and I will yield back to Dr. Black here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klaper. Set us up nicely. And I'd next like to introduce Professor Navin Ramankutty. And Navin is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair. For those of you who are not in the research environment, this is a big deal. This is the most competitive award for Canadian scientists to get their salaries paid so they can do research in this area. So he's a Tier 1 chair. And he is in the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC, and he's the director of the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability. And his research concerns global land use change and its implications, focusing on agricultural practices and the implications for environmental change and food security. He employs data and models to address the question of how to feed 10 billion people while reducing agriculture's environmental footprint.
Thank you, Dr. Klaper. That was an inspiring talk. What an act to follow, you're both a doctor for humans and for the planet. I'm an environmental scientist. I started my career as an engineer, and then I worked on climate science for a few years. And then I switched to working on human land use and now looking at food systems. And today I do some work at the interface of both climate change and food systems. And I can assure you that much of what Dr. Klaper said about food's impact on the environment is true. And let me tell you a little bit more about that today. So this is a map that my students and I put together showing what the world looks like today in terms of its agricultural lands. So we use satellite remote sensing data, satellite imagery, as well as data that we collect from around the ground, and we essentially try to map, how do we use the world's land for agriculture? So the green colors here show croplands, and the orangish colors show grazing lands or pastures. And together, about a third of our world's ice-free land surface is used for agriculture. So if you think about that, we are one of many species on this planet. So one species is using up a third of the world's land just for growing and producing food for ourselves. Dr. Klaper mentioned that a large part of this is for growing animals, for growing flesh. And so these greenish colors show croplands, but about a third of those croplands are fed to animals too. So together, the grazing lands plus the amount of crops or cropland that's used for feeding animals together constitute about 3/4 of our world's agricultural land. This has huge environmental consequences. Biggest one is biodiversity loss. Clearing land for agriculture, as Dr. Klaper mentioned, is one of the biggest causes of species extinctions around the planet. It's also the biggest, agriculture is the biggest user of fresh water around the planet. This is just one example showing the Aral Sea. Satellite imagery from 1987 at the top and 2009 at the bottom. The Aral Sea is basically, a more recent image will show you that it's basically gone. Why do you think the Aral Sea is vanished? Yeah, it's basically for irrigating for cotton. So the two rivers, Amu Darya and Sir Darya, that feed into the Aral Sea have been diverted to irrigate cotton. In Al Gore's movie, there's an image of a ship that's stuck in the sands, and that's in the Aral Sea. Agriculture is also the biggest polluter of fresh water on the planet. This shows an algal bloom. When we apply fertilizers on our agricultural land, some of those fertilizers are taken up by crops, but a huge portion, increasingly a huge portion, is left behind. And when the nutrients, the nitrogen and phosphorus, enters aquatic systems, those systems are usually limited in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus. So the algae are happy to have all this nitrogen and phosphorus. They bloom. You get these kind of stinky algal blooms. When those algae die, they remove oxygen from the water and results in fish kills. So a classic example that happens every year is off the Gulf of Mexico. All the fertilizers that are applied on some of the best lands we have in the Midwestern US flows down the Mississippi River, enters the Gulf of Mexico, and causes these dead zones and with a huge amount of fish kills. This kind of eutrophication happens around the planet. Let's just take climate change itself. As Dr. Klaper already mentioned, deforestation for agriculture causes carbon dioxide emissions. Our cultivation of rice paddy, as well as livestock, cause methane emissions, and methane is an even more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2. And our use of fertilizers causes nitrous oxide emissions, which is an even more powerful greenhouse gas. So if we take a kind of a catalog of global environmental problems and ask, what's the role of agriculture in these problems? If you take greenhouse gas emissions, it turns out that fossil fuel use is still the biggest causer of climate change, but about 1/4 of the climate change problem comes from our food and agriculture. Agriculture is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss on the planet. 60% of threats to birds, one species that we know very well, 60% of threats comes from agriculture. Agriculture is the biggest consumer of fresh water on the planet. It's the biggest polluter of water. So a famous environmental scientist, suddenly blanking on his name, he wrote a book called Red Sky in the Morning, and do you remember the name? He was the director of the Yale School of Environment. He said, once we solve the carbon problem, we are going to have a nitrogen problem next, right? We are so focused as a global society on the climate change problem. And I'm not a climate skeptic. I don't want you to get that message at all. Climate change is a huge threat multiplier. It is one of the problems we have to face. But once we solve the climate problem, we have other problems that are related to food and agriculture: biodiversity loss, water pollution, water use, and soil quality, air quality, and so on. So is it just all agriculture, or is it certain types of agriculture? This shows the climate footprint of food. On the y-axis there, you can see different kinds of food. Beef is at the top, nuts are at the bottom. So these are all different sources of protein. So the biggest reason we eat, we eat meat for taste, but one of the biggest sources of nutrition we get is protein. So comparing these different sources of protein in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions along the y-axis, you can see that there's a huge variation across different food types. But beef, by far, and the white dots there show you the average, is by far the biggest, has the biggest impact on climate compared to other sources of food. So this is per unit protein. So if you eat beef, it's about 25 times larger, and lamb is equally bad. But if you look at beans, pulses, and nuts down below, they're actually they're fairly innocuous in terms of their greenhouse gases. Nuts, in fact, can even be negative because they are trees, and they can actually sequester carbon from the atmosphere. The person who did this research is a very smart fellow from Oxford. I met him at a conference, and he said he started doing this research because there had been work before showing that beef was bad. And he wondered, people always say, but what about the good beef, right? I don't want factory farm beef, but we have regenerative grazing, we have all this kind of, what about beef that we get from a local farmer that we know very well? And so he believed that, and he wanted to show that, in fact, there's a huge variation of greenhouse gas emissions depending on how the beef is produced. That's what the purple line at the top shows you, that there is a big variation. But even the best beef is still not great compared to eating plant-based diets. Why do we have such a high climate footprint for meat? What is fundamentally behind it? First is that animals are very inefficient in converting plant energy. It's a simple biological reason. Biologists have known for decades that it's called how energy moves up the trophic levels. So we have primary producers, which are the plants, and then we have the grazers, like cattle that eat the plants, and then we have the carnivores, right? So we keep going up the trophic chain. As we go up the trophic chain, there's a loss in efficiency. Ecologists have documented this for more than 50 years. And the loss in efficiency is huge. Only about 10% of the energy is transmitted as you go from one level to the next to the next. And this is because a cow that eats grass needs to use up a whole bunch of the energy to keep itself alive and to move around and basically live its life. And so when you eat the cow, you only get a small percentage of the energy that was all in the grass that it originally ate. The second big reason is that ruminants like cattle and sheep that have 4 chambers in their stomach, they emit methane because they have what's called, I won't go into the details, anaerobic oxidation that happens in their stomach, and so they emit methane instead of CO2. So most of life, when we respire, we emit CO2. Ruminants emit methane instead, and methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So these two are the kind of major reasons why eating meat is bad for the planet. It's loss in efficiency, and some of those animals also emit methane. Another one, which is a little harder to prove, is that animals have a larger land footprint. Meat production has a larger land footprint than, say, beans or other plants. And so they can cause deforestation. It's a little harder to trace. We can say, well, and this is an argument that's prevalent today in the literature. Americans will say our beef doesn't cause deforestation. But if you increase beef production in the U.S., where does the extra beef come from? It probably comes from Brazil or other places where deforestation happens. So it's hard to trace how that happens, but people have tried to do that. There's studies that show that increased biofuel production in the U.S., for example, probably led to deforestation in Brazil. So our footprint is not just local. Today, because of the way our food moves around, our footprint is global. This is an illustration of that, what I just told you. I think Dr. Klaper also showed a similar image showing different footprints. So let's say you are eating a veggie burger, and that's the amount of plants that were used to make the veggie burger. Instead, if you ate a chicken burger, and in this, assume that chicken burger gives you the same amount of calories, well, that chicken has to eat plants, and it turns out you need about 3 times more. If you ate a hamburger, you need about 10 times more. That's the loss in efficiency. Here's another chart with some data. This is from Vaclav Smil, who's a prolific writer from the University of Manitoba. on all things environment. He writes a book a year. And apparently he's Bill Gates' favorite author. You may recognize that name. The top graph shows you land requirements for different kinds of food in terms of space per unit of food energy, that's calories. The second row is for protein. The bottom ones show for water. And you can see that beef is really bad compared to the other options. Right? So putting it all together, all the agricultural land we have on the planet today, only about 55% of the calories or the energy that we produce on those crops actually goes to feed humans directly. So this would be things like wheat and rice that we eat directly. About 9% goes off into biofuels and other industrial production. 36% of the grain, about a third, as I mentioned before, goes to feed animals. And then when we eat the animals, only about 4% of the energy goes towards humans. So essentially that 36% is, and then 9% is pretty much lost to the system, right? So we produce 100% of energy, 55 plus 4 is what we actually get in terms of energy. So this is a huge kind of bang for the buck in terms of if you reduce this diversion of grains towards animals and eat it directly, we can reduce the amount of land we use for agriculture. This is a global map illustrating the same thing. The green colors show places in the world where all the calories that are produced, the portion of that that's used directly for human calories, versus the red colors show places where most of the calories that are produced in those places go to other purposes. They're either fed to animals or fed to cars. So take a look at the United States or Western Europe. The U.S. always kills me. When we start as a land use scientist, we talk about what are the places in the world that have the best climates to grow food and the best soils. The Midwestern U.S. is one of the prime examples. It's like the Chernozem soils, really good black soils for growing crops. Yeah, we do grow a lot of corn and soybeans there, and we feed them to animals. A very small percentage of those calories actually come back to humans. So in this study, these are from some close colleagues of mine. They estimated that if you all become vegan, we can get 70% more calories than we currently have. So one way I think about it is becoming vegan is very daunting for lots of people. But if you had a meatless Monday, you solve 10% of the problem. Right? If you had 2 days a week that you give up on meat, you solve 2 over 7, whatever that is, part of the problem. I'm going to end with this slide. I hope most people have seen this. This is from the Canada Food Guide, right? This is what the Canada Food Guide recommends, what your diet should look like. Half your plate should be full of fruits and vegetables. The other remarkable thing they did in the latest iteration of the food guide is they said eat protein food. They removed the category that said meat and dairy, and they said choose whole grain food. And so they didn't specify where your protein food has to come from. Yes, you need protein, but you can get it from plants. It's a huge part of the message. One of the amazing things about coming up with this food guide is that they, for the first time, decided not to consult with the industry. So this was based on just evidence from the literature. Second, this food guide was based just on health considerations, right? They were not looking at environmental footprints at all. But if you compare this food guide with the Eat Lancet report's recommendation, they look identical. Half your plate with fruits and vegetables. So one of the things I've done in my house is to print this out, put it next to our dining table so my kids look at it every time. Thank you very much.
Okay. It now gives me great pleasure, and I had a slide with a picture, to introduce Chantelle Archambault, who is the Communications Director of the Vancouver Humane Society. She's passionate about justice for all, for both humans and animals, and has worked with nonprofit organizations that focus on many things: family services, social justice advocacy, and creating safer spaces for marginalized communities. Her lifelong commitment to the ethical treatment of animals inspired her to adopt a vegan lifestyle and to join the animal protection sector. She has appeared in media outlets, including Global News, CTV Vancouver, City News, and the Daily Hive, and she's going to tell us about the remarkable work that the Vancouver Humane Society is doing in the Lower Mainland. So, welcome, Chantelle.
Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Black. As Dr. Black said, I'm here today from the Vancouver Humane Society to speak about the difference each of us in the Lower Mainland can make by shifting to a plant-based diet, and I'm specifically going to be talking about our environmental impact. A little bit about me. My name is Chantelle Archambault. I'm the Communications Director at the Vancouver Humane Society. I've been vegan for about 3 years now. I was vegetarian for about 7 years before that. And I knew at the time that I was vegetarian that being vegan made sense, but I didn't know that I could do it personally, and I don't know if that resonates with anybody here, but I actually decided to try transitioning to a plant-based diet during lockdown. When we were all staying in more, I was cooking more for myself, and I just decided never to go back. And that's my journey, but all of our journeys look a little bit different. So today I'd like to speak about this report from the Vancouver Humane Society, transitioning toward plant-based diets, which looked at the environmental impacts and the cost savings that an individual can make if they replaced either some or all of the animal-based products in their diet with plant-based. But first, I'd like to speak a little bit about the research that got us here. So late last year, the VHS conducted a poll of Lower Mainland residents to find out basically two things. So first, we wanted to learn about the public attitudes toward plant-based eating so that we could share more effective information with people who are looking to make that diet change, and also so that we can better advocate for policy changes to make plant-based eating more accessible for everyone. We also wanted to learn more about people's current consumption habits, so that allowed us to determine the average diet in the Lower Mainland and then calculate the impact of someone changing from that diet to a plant-based one. So as you can see of the survey respondents, 6% of people identified as vegetarian, 2% of people identified as vegan, another 6% of people were flexitarian, which was defined as eating mostly a plant-based diet with occasional animal-based products. But as you can see, most of the respondents identified as omnivore or carnivore. So if you can imagine the collective impact we can make if this gray section swapped even half of the animal products in their diet for plant-based products, that would effectively cut this impact in half. So the survey did find that there's some really great progress being made already. 2/3 of respondents said that they had reduced their animal product consumption. So the data shows that people are seeing the value in changing the way they eat. The top motivation people listed was for their personal health, followed by cost and environmental concerns, and then animal rights and welfare, which is the reason I transitioned. If we break that down further, the top motivator for people aged 35 and up was personal health, while economic and environmental concerns were the biggest motivators for people aged 18 to 34. And that's really consistent with what we're seeing as the top concerns and motivators for young people. There's a lot of economic uncertainty, so you can imagine someone might be more hesitant to reach for that $25 steak for dinner. And also, we're actively seeing the effects of climate change. There's a net warming of the planet. We might not feel it in this room at this moment, but we're seeing heat domes, there's forest fires, there's flooding. So people are really looking for ways that they can make a difference to protect the environment. And we know that animal agriculture plays a really big role in this. A quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are from food production, and more than half of that is from livestock and fisheries, even though only 18% of our global calories are coming from meat and dairy. So it's really disproportionate. This is a quote from one young person we spoke with who changed her diet for environmental reasons. She said, I became vegan about 3 to 4 years ago with my friends. I have a lot of climate anxiety, and I felt that it was one thing I could do to make me feel like I was doing something to help the climate crisis. It felt like something actionable that I could implement over a lifetime to make some sort of change. And her story isn't unique. We see that this is a major motivator for people to change their diets, and later on I'll speak to the impact that one person can make by doing this. So we see that there are all these positive impacts from changing the way we eat, and we see that most people are recognizing those positive impacts. But what's keeping people from going fully plant-based? That's something we asked in the survey as well. So the top concerns people had were related to taste. They were worried they wouldn't enjoy their meals as much. To cost, they worried that their food costs would actually increase. And health, people believed that they either wouldn't get enough protein or that plant-based diets are just unhealthy in general. So what can we do to address these concerns that people have? Well, first of all, we can share information about the health benefits of plant-based foods at events like this. Thank you all again for being here. We can share resources to help people make those tasty and budget-friendly and nutritious recipes at home. We know that going plant-based doesn't have to be bland or boring or expensive. And the Vancouver Humane Society actually has a platform to do this. Plant University has a lot of recipes and tips from health experts and dietitians, some of whom might be in this room right now, I'm not sure, about how to thrive on a plant-based diet. And we can also advocate for people to have better access to affordable plant-based foods. So this is something the VHS is doing on an institutional level. We've been speaking with restaurants and other institutions like governments and schools to make plant-based items more accessible on their menus, to add more options, to increase their plant-based purchasing. But it's also something that we can do on an individual level. So if you're in a restaurant that doesn't have any plant-based options, you can just ask. And the more people bring that up and the more restaurants and businesses see that there's demand for those options, the more they're going to start prioritizing them. And speaking of that plant-based advocacy work, we also collected data in the survey that can help institutions see the value in switching their menus more to plant-based foods, and also showing governments that there's support for those plant-forward policies. So in the survey, about 3/4 of people believe that menus with more plant-based options are more inclusive to everyone. About 2/3 of people said they would eat more plant-based foods if there were more tasty options available when going out to eat. 60% of people support animal product reduction in government strategies that are related to climate, health, and animal welfare. And 58% of people support shifting government subsidies from animal-based agriculture to plant-based. So as we can see, there's a majority support for making these changes, and there's a huge opportunity in sharing the support with decision makers who have the power to make those changes. I'm almost done with the survey results, but the last thing I wanted to touch on is Lower Mainland diets. So the survey asked people how many servings of various animal products they're eating per month, and a serving in the survey was defined as one 100-gram portion. So based on the results of that, this is how many animal products are consumed each month in one person's average Lower Mainland diet. And then we took those numbers and we used them for the impact report, calculating the potential savings in greenhouse gas emissions and costs if those same products were swapped for these common plant-based alternatives. These are all products that work really effectively in most recipes, so beef for lentils, pork for tempeh, chicken for tofu. So the report found that by swapping 100% of the animal products in their diet to plant-based alternatives, the average resident in the Lower Mainland could save 68 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents per month. So if you drive, that is about the equivalent of a tank of gas in a hybrid vehicle. If you're really into recycling, it's about 3 bags of waste recycled instead of sent to the landfill. If you have a cell phone like most of us do, it's about 8,300 cell phone charges. If they made that same switch for a full year, they could save 816 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents, which is about the emissions needed to power an entire home for 6 months, enough for a round trip in a gas vehicle from Vancouver to Regina, or the amount sequestered by an entire acre of forested land in that same period of time. And veering off topic from the environment for a little bit, the report also found that by making those same swaps, a person could save about $600 a year on groceries. So even if a person is just changing 50% or 25% of their diet to plant-based, they're still making a significant impact, and those impacts will add up over time. If you're looking to make the biggest impact in terms of carbon emissions, beef is the biggest offender because cows need a lot of space. They eat a lot of food. They produce a lot of methane. So for a person eating the average Lower Mainland diet, swapping all the beef that they eat for lentils would result in double the emission savings compared to swapping all the other animal products that we listed. But it's also worth considering that there are other impacts of making swaps. So if you're shifting your diet for animal welfare reasons, it's important to consider the amount of animal lives it takes to produce a product. It takes about 134 chickens to produce the same amount of meat as 1 cow. And also considering the amount of suffering in an animal's lifetime. But the most important thing to note, and the thing that I want to really leave you on, is that any swap from animal products to plant-based products is going to make a change, and those changes really add up significantly over time. And that's why we're here to support people in doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. So if you'd like to check out the resources that I mentioned today, you can visit the Vancouver Humane Society's Plant University website, which, as I mentioned, has a lot of recipes. There's tips to get started on a plant-based diet and to thrive once you're already there. There's plant-based news, there's a map of local plant-based businesses, and so many more things, so I hope you'll check that out. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or the rest of my team at Vancouver Humane Society on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and I'll also be available after the presentation. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Chantelle. That was great. I'm going to close my computer now. I am very thankful to say that our next speaker is not using slides. Dr. Jade Dittaro is a physician who works as a hospitalist in Kelowna, BC, and she's the site director of the UBC Kelowna Regional and Regional Family Practice Training Sites. She trained in family medicine. She's American board certified in lifestyle medicine. She has an interest in nutrition, and she's going to speak to the importance of bringing nutrition training into undergraduate and residency training for BC doctors in training, and the impact that dietary change can have. So Jade, please come up, and we look forward to hearing from you.
I hope you don't mind this is still in the background, but do you want a little...
Get rid of it. No, we do. There you go. It's gone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not a slide person. I never have been. I think they're wonderful in other people's presentations, but I'm a hand talker, and I do a lot of storytelling, and it doesn't always jive. The one thing I had thought about putting in the background was actually the scene, the view from my house in Kelowna this summer of the fire across the lake in West Kelowna. And it was too horrific to put up there, but talk about compelling reason. It stared my family in the face, and for hours we watched a mountain burn, feeling absolutely helpless. And so Dr. Klaper talked about hope in his talk and how hope is action, and that's how I live. So even though public speaking is not my jam, I'm up here because this is my way of instilling hope, and it's my way of feeling hope. So thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Jade Dittaro. I live in Kelowna. I am the site director of the Family Med program there, and I'm also a loud voice. And so what has happened with that is I became the co-climate lead for UBC for undergraduate medicine, but also for family medicine in the past year. I may not be the leading expert. I'm not an environmental scientist, but I want change. And so they created the jobs, and here I am being able to tout that off as part of my credentials now. What does that mean, though? That means that I have lots of intersection in my job. If I'm going to train family physicians, if I'm going to be a part of the medical education, then it would be foolish not to talk about climate. You know, even just to have this conversation that climate and planetary health is separate from human health, it's not. Look at the indigenous way of thinking. We are the planet. We are one. Planetary health is us. And so it needs to be part of the curriculum on all levels. And part of what I've been involved in, I'm so privileged to, is to see curriculum implemented now for the medical students in our program, for the family practice residents, but furthermore, we're teaching the physicians in the community who are teaching the learners, because a lot of them received no training in this, right? A lot of this is a moving target. But, you know, one of the things Dr. Klaper always mentions, and I have to say this because I am a huge fan, and I learned a lot from him, but it's that, yes, we truly don't get any nutrition training in medical education. And now there are those of us who are like, that's not the way it's going to be anymore. That's not the way it can be anymore, because nutrition is, as you can see from all these presentations, such a compelling and integral part of improving the planet and improving our own health. So why not make it part of it? And not just a little tic-tac of a 1-hour lecture somewhere. It needs to be embedded. So one thing that's really exciting that I was hoping was going to be made official is that there's these key topics in medicine in Canada. And it's what our learners have to study for their exams, in particular for the family practice residents. And I mean, family medicine, as much as it may be in a bit of crisis, is still one of the pillars in medicine. And so thankfully, in the next iteration of what are the key topics, planetary health is, from what I hear, going to be there. Yay! So, story time. So what do we do, right? So the way to implement it, and I want you to know this because when you go to your doctors, I want you to also be part of who educates them. So you can hear what they're learning, and then you can also challenge them on things. That's okay, because what you're learning is we don't know it all when it comes to the planet, when it comes to nutrition. So working on it right now in BC, the undergraduate students, so those in their 4 years of medicine, are learning things like what's the climate impact anytime they do a scholar project? And can your scholar project, can your research actually be based around the climate in medicine? Why not just pay lip service to it? Like, why would you do that? Why not go the extra step? So that's there. They're case-based learning. They're trying to make the cases, you know, the example cases where they learn about the foundations of medicine actually have a climate component. So you have a patient, maybe you have a 65-year-old patient and they have pretty severe COPD, and it is the dead of summer in the Okanagan, and if you've ever been there, it's like 115 degrees Fahrenheit sometimes. And pardon my Fahrenheit, I grew up on the Minnesota border in northern Ontario, so I still speak in those terms. But I mean, it's filthy hot, right? And so you have these patients like this COPDer who doesn't have air conditioning, and they have come in with an exacerbation. There's no infectious cause. They weren't exposed to anything in particular. It ends up being heat-related. The worst part is they say, oh yeah, doc, I have a wall unit at home, and I'm gonna go home and my bed actually isn't in the room with the wall unit, but I'm gonna do a swap, and away I go. And so you do your best. You prescribe them some inhalers that you know may or may not help. One of them being salbutamol, which is known as Ventolin. And by the way, just for a stat for you, every Ventolin inhaler is the equivalent of 270 kilometers of car travel. And there are tens of thousands of them prescribed in Canada every month. So talk about another reason to go plant-based and to try and improve your health. You unburden a lot of those resources, right? So you send this patient home, and you hope for the best, right? COPD. These are the type of cases that the learners are going to be learning about. And that is a real life case that I had. And that patient died because of the climate. That was the cause of death, was the climate. This person's COPD couldn't handle the extreme weather and did not have the resources because socioeconomic status wasn't there. And we're going to see more of that. And we do. Look at the heat wave. The heat wave that happened in Canada, one of my cousins died. It's real life. This isn't just stories that you hear in the news where we go, oh, yeah, that's somebody else's problem. That's all of our problem, and that's real life, and I can attest to the personal connection. So they learn that. They also get a lecture from me, so good luck to them. But it's going to be more about what to do, right? What to talk about in the clinic. What are some really important, tangible things that you can talk to your patients about? And this is also what we're doing in family medicine, by the way. So stuff like how to help a patient who comes in with eco-anxiety, which is getting more and more prevalent. And so we saw today that one of the biggest things we can help people with that is an actionable item is shifting their diet and encouraging everybody around them to also shift. And it's not about being perfect. You know, I'm at a point where, yes, I want everybody on Earth that possibly can, who's in a good socioeconomic status, to go fully plant-based. And you know what? I choose to. I've been vegan for 5 years because I know a lot of people who are marginalized and have lower socioeconomic status and challenges maybe cannot. But I'm privileged enough that I can. There's also ethical implications. But anyway, it's about encouraging people to get there as far as they can. So talking about this with patients with eco-anxiety has actually been effective. And I know there's literature coming out and research, and I'm not going to quote studies for you, but I'm just saying it's wonderful to be able to sit there face-to-face with a human who is absolutely terrified about their future and give them a good take-home that's instantaneous and that it isn't just them that can make the change, it's the people around them. And then with the power of social media now, it's amazing the people that they can influence that they may not even realize they're influencing just by sharing that interaction with that physician, the information that they received. So this is what our future generation of medical learners is thankfully getting. Now, the good news is it's not just BC. I missed a meeting that was across the country, and I'll tell you why. It's kind of funny, but key players from family medicine programs across the country met to talk about how to get planetary health more embedded into the curriculum, more embedded into the structure of family medicine. They made the meeting at 9:30 Eastern time. I wasn't waking up to 10 to 6:30 a.m. meeting. I mean, I really tried. I really tried. It's so important. But we're going to have follow-ups. And so there's changes being made in other places, which is great. So the other thing, though, is that, you know, we were talking a bit about institutions and getting them to change their diet, their menus, right? So same goes. Why are we teaching medical learners about plant-forward diets, about climate impact and planetary health if we're not also walking the walk? And so a lot of what's happening now is behind the scenes. Like every time we have a meeting in the family medicine sphere, in the undergraduate medicine sphere, are we following the Eat Lancet Commission? Are we ordering a plant-forward or fully plant-based menu? And, you know, yeah, sure, we can get compostable cutlery and try not to use single-use plastic. But again, it comes back to diet. People love food. They love meetings that are surrounded by food and lunch meetings and workshops. And so why not change it? Default Veg. That's, by the way, a really wonderful organization in the United States if you ever want to check it out, Default Veg. Default Veg. So the concept is that is the default, right? That the menu that you offer is fully plant-based, and then if somebody really insists that they want to add an extra, that's a surcharge, right? So this beautiful, delicious bowl, right? Yeah, that has quinoa and whatever. Don't surcharge me for my oat milk anymore, you know? This is a lot of fun, right? But it's like you get this beautiful bowl, and no, pay extra for the chicken, and hopefully that makes people think a little bit. It's been, you know, so wonderful and such a privilege to be able to adopt all of these ideas with my own residents, and I know some of them are going to be watching, and bless their hearts, because they go with it and they run with it. And now a lot of them are getting interested in this. They're asking about extra nutrition courses. They're asking about getting board certified in lifestyle medicine, because how many of you here actually know that lifestyle medicine is a designated specialty? So it's in the United States, but not in Canada. And being board certified is a fairly rigorous process, and it's truly evidence-based. So we're hoping to get it going in Canada. We know things can be really slow, but there's a lot of us who are getting board certified, a lot of us practicing lifestyle medicine or implementing it into our current practices and being more vocal about it within our country. Because again, it is really rewarding to treat people and have them be healthy instead of just manage their chronic disease. And trust me, I am a hospitalist who sees the sickest of the sick day in and day out. I don't want to just send people home knowing they're going to come back sick. I want to send them home knowing they will stay home and be healthy. So my last piece to you before we open it up to our Q&A is when you go to the doctor's office, you are now armed with a bit of knowledge that they're getting training. It's still not enough. They sometimes need a push from you. Bring resources. The Eat Lancet Commission that we talked about, like if we're going to go at it from an environmental angle, the Eat Lancet Commission, print off Canada's food guide and bring it to the doctor. Tell them about a book you read. You know, there is a wonderful, so we've all talked about books. For me, it was We Are the Weather. That book did it for me. I was done. I was not going back from a plant-based diet. It was very compelling. So don't be shy. Speak up. Know that we're trying in the medical world, and hopefully it will get caught up very, very quickly. Thanks for having me.
So, any comments, thoughts from audience members? If you will, please step up to the mic, and you can ask a question of any of our panelists.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Something that I'm trying to kind of comprehend with your help, like maybe you can help me. So, like, I understand the impact of food with the climate and the choices that we do does produce that impact, right? But there's this gnawing thing that's kind of bothering me, is that there is market forces. Like, let's say, for example, I'm vegetarian, I don't chicken, right? But it's not like I don't eat chicken and then the chicken doesn't get produced. The chicken's already produced. It's already like, there's induced demand already, there's predicted demand. Even in retail environments, there's predictions yearly on the, like a Safeway, for example. Oh, we need to increase our sales on this, like in the executive board. Oh, we need to increase our sales 20%, blah, blah, blah. The meat department on certain Costco's and things like that. So my question is, like, with this in mind, with market forces and induced demand, how does it, like, with just the choices I'm making on a personal level, I don't want to be a pessimist, but like, how does it fit into that induced demand market force? Because it's not like a feedback loop where if I don't eat chicken, it's not like the chicken isn't slaughtered. It's slaughtered already, right? So that's just something I kind of want to ask, and help me out to understand. Thank you.
I think Jade will start. Yeah. She's always willing to take something on.
That is such a good question. Thank you so much for that. And you know, that was a lot of my thinking too, until I started seeing the dairy sales plummet. Yeah, truly. And I can't rattle off figures to you, but I've seen the data, and I know that demand does change. You know, there's a concept of a tipping point, and again, you know, just one person making the choice, no, but maybe you talking to your friends about it, maybe the more we have these talks, you know, the more people get educated on it, eventually they do see that consumer demand goes down. But the other thing the other piece to this that I didn't mention and I really want to encourage is, you know, the lobbying, the trying to get policy changed. And so, you know, next week I'm talking to 250 food services personnel at a different speaking event about plant predominance and trying to get food services industry to change, right? Because that's how you also drive down demand. So I think it's just we keep attacking it on all fronts, really, right? Like we all keep talking about it. Everyone keeps changing their personal choices, and it does change. I promise.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said. And also, it's all going to be mutually reinforcing, right? Like, as soon as we have a lot of people having a wave of less demand for animal products, there's going to be more companies that are trying to meet the demand for new plant-based products now, and they're going to be innovating, and they're going to be developing things that are more cost-effective. They're going to be more competitive with how tasty things are, and then that is going to pull more people into eating more plant-based foods, and it's all going to just kind of be a self-reinforcing cycle where we're producing less animal products as a whole overall over time.
One of the areas that really concerns me is how much our subsidies go towards dairy. In the U.S., about 70% of the subsidies go towards meat. In Canada, our subsidies go towards dairy. And as a dietitian, I know we have very strong promotion among the dietitians of Canada towards dairy. In the schools, you've got teachers being taught and all kinds of informational materials that are pro-dairy. And I know a lot of those subsidies go towards that teaching. We also find that if they dump the dairy, if they make too much, they still get paid for it. And this is a really big concern for me. I think we're putting huge amounts of taxpayer money into dairy.
Well, I was just going to say it bothers me to no end, so I can totally, I totally relate. And that one I honestly don't know, because like how much more obvious do we have to be? Look at Canada's food guide. Dairy is not even a category on there.
That's right.
And yet this is happening, and it shows how powerful their industry and their lobbying is, right? And
That's
so
right.
again, I never want to give up hope, and so I just try my best to rally people to sign petitions and write letters to your, local politicians and try to, vote. Like, our voter turnout is often abysmal, so we need to vote the right people in, vote for people who actually care about these issues and make it an issue, right? The fur farms in BC, right? We banned all of the mink fur farms because of persistence and lobbying and being vocal. So I'd like to think we'd eventually do the same, but right now the dollars speak, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I'd also say that the advertising industry is very, very powerful. Milk does a body good, right? There were all those ads. A lot of false information propagated by industry. We have a Canada food guide that was developed by Health Canada that is about health, but we know that the food policy is really under the aegis of Agriculture Canada. So I think what Michael said about helping dairy farmers transition, policy change is really the important thing here. So lobbying, policy change, and educating people and getting people to drink less animal secretions. Chantelle?
Yeah, absolutely. Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And also going back to the motivations for people, I think the advocacy we do around this needs to touch on a bunch of different areas. Like, dairy cows lead longer suffering lives than a lot of the animals in the animal agriculture industry. But if we're just advocating for animal welfare, 29% of people had reduced the amount of animal products in their diets for animal welfare reasons. If we're just advocating for animal welfare, we're hitting about a third of people. There's other reasons to transition away from this as well. Cows are major methane producers. They produce a lot of greenhouse gases. And then it's also an inclusivity issue. Not everybody can drink dairy milk. Especially people who are from different ethnic communities than the Eurocentric thing that is the basis of a lot of our nutrition information. So transitioning to those alternatives like oat milk is a really good option.
One of the big pushes is money. And if we didn't have so much subsidies, milk would be a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have those supports for the oat industry, for the oat milk, that kind of thing. So thank you very much. Oh, and there's one group in Canada, which used to be called Nation Rising, that's very vocal about subsidies. What's that, Charlyn? Yeah.
Canadians for healthy, responsible food policy. Right. Canadians for
Yeah.
responsible food policy.
If you look up Nation Rising, you still get transferred to that.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks,
very much.
thanks, Vicente.
And for these excellent presentations, too.
Brigitte.
Thank you. It's so awesome to be here. Thank you so much, Charlyn, for putting this panel together, and it always warms my heart and gives me hope that the good people are fighting the good fight and it's getting somewhere, and especially the part about having medical students being educated earlier on, especially in family practice. Thank you so much to both of you doing that work. And I was at a panel at the Writers' Festival. It was the last panel on Sunday night that was called Not Too Late, and it was about the climate crisis. And you had Rebecca Solnit, who wrote the book Not Too Late, and Chris Turner and John Vaillant. And you may know John Vaillant. He wrote the Golden Spruce, long environmental stories, something about the tiger. But his most recent book is called Fire Weather, and it's about the 2016 Fort McMurray forest fires. And it's the irony of having this massive forest fires in the center of oil production in Canada. And he said the most troubling thing for him is that the people who had suffered in the fire the most didn't really connect the dots. And those were all people working in the oil industry, normal workers. And basically he said they just wanted to get back their life as before. And I was thinking about that as you were talking about seeing the view, in Kelowna and the fires. And I'm wondering, when you talk about these different topics with medical students, but also possibly with patients, and also putting in the perspective of there's an environmental crisis and the health crisis that goes with it. How do you deal with those more psychological objections of, I just want normal, whatever that means, right?
Yeah. I know. It's so different for everybody, and I think what we've realized is humans can be complex beings, and what resonates to one person won't with another. So a lot of times when I'm speaking with patients, the one general thing I can say to all of them that leads them all to a different answer is, what is your why? And then go 5 times more. Like, why? Okay, let's go again. Let's go. Let's get to the deep of it. And so, in my personal job, being a hospitalist, I see people with new diagnoses of diabetes, new strokes, new heart attacks, new cancer diagnoses. So I get them a lot of times when they're their most vulnerable, and I just open the conversation. Like, what does it mean to you to get health back, and to not have this happen again? And then let's take it a step further, and what if that choice also improves planetary health? I see you're a grandparent. What does that mean for your grandchildren? And I'm not trying to prey on them in a time of weakness. I'm just trying to help them to be able to find that why. And I think, again, it's just, look at a third of people really resonate with animal agriculture. And so you can tie in whatever it may be. Maybe it's all 3, but they're the ones that need to get solid on it in order to stay committed.
Yeah, just a question for the doctors, and then another question for Navin, if I may. So I work in the community food security sector, and we receive some funding through Vancouver Coastal Health and the Health Authority and so on for community food programming. And so we do a lot of programming around nutrition, of course, and we know, and Dr. Klaper, that list of yours, all these preventable illnesses, and I'm sure you could add dozens and dozens more illnesses to that list, are preventable and largely diet related. And yet, and we know this, and we must know that this is going to save the medical system millions and billions of dollars. And yet, I can tell you, of someone working in the field, we receive around $200,000 through the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority for community food programs. Like that's such a tiny, 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 tiny amount. The province just announced a $200 million, which is quite a lot of money. We've never seen this amount before ever, given to food systems work, but none of that is going to the Ministry of Health, as far as I know. So we're still seeing, how can we make a stronger message that diet needs to be, like diet prevention, or nutritional work needs to be funded to a much, much greater extent? Because we already know how it works. Why aren't they hearing it? What more do we need to tell them to get more funding for this work? So that's my one question. I have one more, if I may, after you.
Can I just?
Sure.
I would suggest that we have active disinformation from Big Food. Big Food has learned all of the lessons that Big Tobacco learned to get people to buy addictive products. We know that food is made to be more addictive. Processed food hooks people. The temptation of high fat, high bad carbs, lots of sugar, it's addictive. And the food industry studies this and goes after us on taste. That is one huge thing. And in addition, we know that the food industry buys off people, researchers, doctors, dietitians. The pharmacologic industry is at every doctor's door. There is no nutrition, there's no big broccoli saying, how are we going to fix this? So there is a system that is really trying to tell us that we need to eat the wrong things and that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I get it. What about the number crunchers? Aren't they looking for savings? Aren't they seeing that we can save a lot of money by investing in nutrition?
I don't think that message has landed yet. I mean, certainly in public health, we talk about we're not interested in pulling bodies out of the river that are coming down. We're interested in looking upstream and saying what we can do. Then I don't think the economic case, I think you're right, I don't think the economic case has been made as powerfully as it could within the academic world. So, don't know, Jade, if you want to.
I'd just further add that, one of the things we study in lifestyle medicine and behavior change is that doctors are more willing to counsel patients on changing behavior that they also have, adopted that healthy lifestyle behavior. So in particular, they looked at exercise, but you can easily extrapolate that to food, right? So how are we ever going to promote a nutritious plant-forward diet when the majority of physicians don't follow that dietary pattern? And so that's why I keep going back to medical education, not just for the med students and the residents and whatnot, but also the people who are currently practicing, because it's never too late to change. And until they get on board, they make that part of mainstream in their own practices. And thank goodness for the new payment model for the family physicians, so they have more time to talk about this, because money talks, and that was a big factor, is they only had constraints with their appointments. But until they start doing that, and then they think about actually, one of our roles as family physicians is to be an advocate. So until we start making that part of our advocacy, it may not change. We always talk about how food at this point is the new smoking, right? So we need to use the same tactics that we did in order to make smoking, a lesser popular thing. And so that's my opinion.
Brigitte wanted to add something.
I just wanted to say that I think, as far as I know, the only organization that has done the math is Kaiser Permanente in the U.S. as the health insurer organization, and they also own hospitals, and they figured that they had to push both in their guidelines to their physicians to encourage them, and Dr. Klaper would know a lot more than me about that, but also in their cafeterias and their staff support programs to encourage them to adopt plant-based for themselves. I don't know how aggressive they are in real life. If it's just like in the Canada Food Guide, you know, it's choose mostly plants, by the way, written kind of small at the bottom. But anyway, they've done the math and they know it would be good for them money-wise.
So maybe we need to apply it to the Canadian population and try and get some op-eds about the cost savings that might accrue.
So first of all, thanks, Dr. Klaper. I'm 9 years plant-based. Thanks very much in part to you and some of your words of wisdom that I heard in different documentaries. And speaking of a documentary, I actually have an environmental science question. The documentary Milked, right, really showed me a lot of things when you looked at New Zealand, pollution of the waterways and things like that. Where Milk End was on industrial fermentation of milk. Have you done any modeling on comparing traditional milk or dairy agriculture versus fermentation? Because as soon as it becomes cheaper, you know industry is going to switch. And then the second question was, as you go from traditional milk or dairy agriculture to industrial, is there any health implications? Right? So. And it might be so new that we don't even know that yet, right? But I think that as soon as we hit that tipping point, we'll be on the other side, maybe smaller footprint, animals not involved. Have you done any modeling?
No. I think we are at this will be cutting edge, right? We are just starting to see these things change. This has been the question with all the plant-based meats as well. You know, Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger, a lot of people are concerned about how it's highly processed food. But then there's a conversation about does processed mean bad all the time? Maybe it doesn't have to be. I don't think this is a question for the health people. I don't think we know the health impacts of all these new innovative.
Dr. Klaper has an opinion here.
Well, the whole dairy thing is an unusual side pocket of human nutrition. We, grew up pouring this white liquid on our cereal, etc. But nutritionally, you have no more need for the milk of a cow than you do the milk of a giraffe. Would you pour dog milk on your cereal? Would you pour moose milk? Why do we somehow think this lactation secretions of these large bovines is somehow good for us when there's nothing in it that we really need? And yet, the stunning amount of grains that are fed to the cattle, the amount of manure they produce, the water that is used, the subsidies that are delivered, for a white liquid to pour on your cereal, it's stunning the amount of resources that are devoted to it, plus all the health problems that come from it. And I'm not an expert on industrial milk production, but clearly when you pasteurize milk, when you heat it up to 150 degrees and do a flash pasteurization on it, it denatures the proteins to some extent, and hence not that I think raw milk is even more dangerous, but surely there are health implications. The more you process any product, the more adverse effects you're going to get from it. It's time again to get honest with the Canadian public, and it would take it wouldn't take much, and certainly in America, but all you need is a few sports stars and a few movie celebrities to say, oat milk is where it's at, and I used to drink dairy milk. I don't drink that stuff anymore. You could like turn the ocean liner to another direction there, and we need to start doing that. The dairy industry is like whaling. It's something from another century that has no real business in the 21st century, given what it not only what it costs environmentally, ethically, etc. But now with all the wonderful milk, the oat milk, hemp milk, rice milk, almond milk, pick a grain, there's a milk made from it. It really is time for dairy products to exit stage left. And it starts with our buying habits. People don't appreciate the power they have when they put that dollar down. That says, Not only do I want more of this stuff, but take another calf away from its mother, shoot another dairy cow in the head, pollute some more water, spray some more pesticides on the grains. It's just so destructive that we need to, I would take society and give it a little slap. Wake up, it's time to outgrow that stuff. And so the sooner that happens, and we can help it happen by just not buying this stuff and buy the plant-based products.
Yay. Okay, Ian, did you have another question?
Navin, have you done any work around fish farming? Okay, so fish farms. So I'm transitioning away from meat, eating fish still, steelhead. I'm not eating the wild fish as much. A lot of the argument is reducing land use for agricultural and meat production. What about, can that be a reasonable substitute in terms of a protein substitute that's sustainable and low emission, all that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
I'm not talking Atlantic farm salmon, but some of the more sustainable farmed fisheries.
I haven't personally I've personally worked on land-based agriculture, but obviously fish farms are land-based in some sense. And so I think the estimates today are that about 50% of our fish comes from farmed fish, compared to taken fish. The environmental impacts of those are also bad. They also have greenhouse gas footprints. They are depending on what fish. We have the same trophic chain problem. So if you're eating farmed salmon, and the salmon are fed fish that are lower down the trophic chain, there's a loss in efficiency there as well. So there was a study that said that for every salmon that we eat, there's 3 times more other fish that are being fed to the salmon. And now it's gotten weird. People are starting to feed soy to the salmon as well. So the whole system is, between land and ocean are getting tied up as well. So every time we start taking food this is the way I think about it. Every time we start taking food that humans could eat directly and start using it to feed animals that we later eat, there's a loss of efficiency along the trophic chain. So the best thing we can do with fish is eating lower down the trophic chain. Eat tilapia, for example. That's much better than eating a farmed salmon. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought up the fish feed, because that is definitely an issue for all fish farms. There are also still some open net fish farms that are quite harmful to the waterways. So fishes that are in open net fish farms, they're quite high density. So they're at risk of diseases and parasites, and those will leach into the surrounding waters and impact the other fish populations, the wild fish populations as well. But I'm glad that you also mentioned the wild fishes that are fed to those farmed fishes.
Oh, I'll certainly add on to what she said. Fish farms are just an environmental disaster, and it's getting worse and worse. You've got 100,000 salmon in one of these circular nests there. These are carnivore fishes. It's like you're raising cheetahs, or leopards. These are carnivorous fish here, and so you got to feed them a lot of food and a tremendous amount of the fish that are caught in the nets are fed back to fish and fed back to the salmon for food. But because, as the doctor said, there's now a tremendous amount of soy being fed, et cetera, and as they shovel in these bushels and bushels of soy fish food, most of it falls through to the bottom of the ocean there, which is very shallow, and it is similar to the algae blooms. It eutrophies the water there. It becomes a tremendously polluted area there. But as you can't do one thing in nature. Oh, we're just raising fish for food. Well, that's what you think you're doing. But also, it's turning out, as our Humane Society expert just said, The salmon get sea lice. They get these parasites growing on them. They're up to a half inch or longer that encrust the salmon. Well, guess who else is drawn to these salmon nests? The orcas that are swimming by. Ooh, they smell the salmon, and so now they are snooping around the nets, and the sea lice come out and attach to the orcas, and now you got orcas with incrustations of these sea lice around their eyes and around their noses from the salmon farms, and now the salmon are escaping. This is not going to happen. Well, of course it was going to happen, and it does. And now these frankenfish are breeding with the native fish, Pacific salmon, and the offspring don't know how to get back up to the rivers where they were spawned originally, like the classic salmon runs do. And all the way around, it's become just so destructive on every level, polluting so much of the ocean and the orcas and the fish stocks. And for what? For this piece of pink flesh on your plate for sushi or whatever it is. Again, it's similar to the white liquid on your cereal. Good heavens! There's plant-based salmon. They're growing salmon. I'm not a big fan of the cultivated meats, but it sure beats the heck out of what we're doing to the actual salmon. Find something else to put on your salad, but there's no reason to be eating the flesh of salmon. You can get all the nutrients out of lentils and plant-based foods. But it's time to let the fish off the hook, and especially when it comes to these poor salmon.
I just want to comment. I saw a great video recently by Earthling Ed about fish. I'd really encourage everybody to watch this one. Great. It will really help you understand the impact that even wild fish and wild fish takes are having on the oceans, the amount of fish that are wasted, that get caught unnecessarily in nets, the amount of suffering, and fish do suffer. So there's a huge, I think, environmental destruction both from wild and farmed fish. And from a health perspective, I just listened to Dr. Klaper's talk to medical students, and it's more flesh. It's not as healthy as plant-based protein. Eat more beans. It's really the way to go.
Well, that's perfect segue, because I know that was a lot of like us in strong words saying please don't eat fish, but what I want to give you is also the hope that you don't need them for omega-3. So that's a really common thing for health. So hemp, chia, flax, walnut are all great omega-3. You can also get these wonderful algae-based omega-3 supplements, and then that way you're totally taking out the middle fish, and you're not worrying about the contaminants as well, like the mercury and the microplastics and all the other chemicals and whatnot that may be in the fish that the omega is derived from. So that is a really encouraging thing that I want you to also take away, is that you're not going to miss out on that. And there's lots of other things that give you healthy fats too in general, right? Avocado, olive oil, etc. So just a positive there.
As a follow-up, because it's great that you mentioned the nutrition aspect of like omega-3s and things like this, but let's be honest, nutrition is noisy. Like going back to misinformation, right? It's like, why, in a scientific perspective, why is there no consensus in nutrition? Like, I just don't understand it. Like, even the caloric model is like, people talk about it being outdated, and then there's the DASH diet, and there's paleo, keto. It's insanity. So I'm just like, can you give me some insight to what's driving these things? Like economic, like certain subsidies. It's just like, it's confusing. And it gives me fatigue just to think about it, honestly. Thank you.
Sure. I'll start, but Dr. Klaper's probably going to take this home, I can tell you right now. But yeah, there's a lot of things. People people like those in the carnivore diet are set to make millions off of the supplements that they sell. Look at the Liver King, who's telling everybody to eat testicles of animals. You know, I'm grossed out by his net worth. Like, it's unbelievable. And I don't know if we're recording this, if it matters if I'm calling people out by name. I'm just going to say I don't really care. So, you know, there's those people who are out to make a buck. Then, you know, I think Brenda Davis, I really love how she puts it. Like, a lot of these diets, like keto, paleo, etc., the common denominator with plant-based is the reduction and removal of processed foods. We can all agree eating whole foods is better. And then I think because we've agreed that whole foods is better, we've sat up here tonight and tried to make a compelling argument that the whole food diet you want to pick out of all of those is the one that's plant predominant, simply for the environmental aspect, let alone looking at the animal welfare part of it. But the good news is, and what you don't see on social media, is the medical community is coming to a consensus. We're seeing more and more guidelines, whether it's the cardiology associations, diabetes associations, the guidelines for stroke management, you know, overall health, what you're looking at for weight management, you know, good diets in the setting of cancers. It really is going more plant forward. And so you get to see all of this literature in the medical community that doesn't get all of the fancy bells and whistles and popularity on social media just because maybe it's kind of boring sounding to want to just eat mostly plants. But it's there. And the Canada's Food Guide is there. And so I hope that can give a bit of clarity. And let me just tell you that if somebody is on social media saying something radically different, A, they may just be trying to be different, to be popular, and B, are they out to make money? And chances are, if they're hawking some sort of this supplement or this plan or this program, this is their get rich. So.
Well said. Not much to add to that. Why is it so noisy? Because there's a lot of people making a lot of money or are very passionate about their particular viewpoint. They like the taste of steak in their mouth, and so they're going to justify that, and that you need this, and you'll die if you don't get it. And a lot of folks, it's not based on science. We are plant-eating hominids. We have basically the same digestive system that our gorilla and bonobo cousins have, and they're up in the trees eating leaves and fruit and vegetation all day. And if we follow that type of example, we wind up largely free of these dreadful diseases. And the idea that no gorilla eats animal flesh 3 times a day. No advanced primate does that at all. And we've been sold this bill of goods that you got to eat animal flesh 3 times a day. That's bizarre, and we see the effects that it's having upon us. It's time to turn the page on that. Do you have to be 100% vegan? I wish you would. I think that would be the best for the planet and for the animals, etc. But I'm not going to quibble if someone wants to have a little piece of flesh once a week, fine, whatever. Just the majority of what goes down your gullet should have grown out of the ground and be minimally processed. It's time to stop all the killing, stop all the industrial level of death that we inflict upon these innocent animals. All that imbalance is starting to show up now. We've sown so much death in our society and in the ecosystem that it's now trickling back up into every aspect of our lives. The forests are dying, the seas are dying. Death is not the way to nourish our futures, to say the least. We've used fishing up. We've used meat eating up. No matter what the mighty hunter in the past, doesn't matter. The fisherman hauling the fish out by the metric ton, that's gluttony, that's greed, that's unacceptable at this point. It's time for us to declare peace with the animals, with the planet, with our own bodies, with Mother Nature, and we do that by realizing that I've never heard a carrot scream, and we should be eating plants and the suffering and our suffering as well.
Just a quick comment. First of all, to thank you all. This has been a great session. And Michael, I've followed your work for a long time, and just thank you for all your contributions and your persistence. A few things. As a health professional, I think it is fairly appalling that we do call ourselves health professionals, that most of us in our profession descriptions call ourselves evidence-based. We also say that we want best practice, and I think we're so far from that ideal. And if we want to be illness care professionals, that's okay. There's a place for that, but not to get that confused with health. The other resource, and Michael just alluded to this, is Milton Mills's work on the comparative anatomy of eating. There is nothing about us when you look at 18 to 20 dimensions of anatomy, physiology, and metabolism. There is nothing that makes us an omnivore. And I think lastly, that relates to that is Dr. Melanie Joy's work. Now, I don't know if you know her work, and she's coined the framework of carnism. And carnism is that invisible belief system in our societies, and particularly since World War II, it gained huge momentum with economic growth, that this hidden belief system is that we are meat eaters and that it is normal, natural, and a necessity, and it is none of those things. And the more we adopt an animal-based diet, the sicker we are, and the more we adopt a plant-based diet, the healthier we are. So my only hope is that we as so-called health professionals truly practice health, and it's quite amazing that there hasn't been a class action suit drawn against us because we're not health professionals, we're not practicing the best, and we're not evidence-based. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Well done.
Our last question of the evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentations. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I was wondering, so I've been vegan about 7 years. I'm also a personal trainer. So I work with a lot of people who are, very eager to get their health, improve their health, do all sorts of, increase their training performance, stuff like that. And I feel like my efforts thus far to kind of help them transition haven't been super successful. But I do get a lot of questions about food, even though it's, a little outside my scope of practice. But where would you, I have two questions. One is, I know you talk a lot about not only a vegan diet, but a whole foods-based diet. So where do you kind of draw the line between a whole food and not a whole food? And also, what's sort of your approach when you get somebody who is, eager to get started on their health journey, but maybe, not really educated in this? Like, what's kind of the first thing you tell them to do?
Right. Whole foods are, the ideal whole food is a food that you could recognize if it was growing in the garden. Oh, there's a cucumber there, there's a tomato over there, there's a strawberry. Those are whole foods. And that should really constitute all of your diet, or the vast majority of it. Then you move into minimally processed foods. I guess you can grind up grains to make bread, and so that would be a minimally processed food. Boiling potatoes, so you're minimally processing it to make the starches digestible. But that's about it. Vegan, and a lovely concept, but it includes Oreo cookies and cola drinks and granola bars and all sorts of things that are not gentle with the physiology. So you want whole foods that are plant-based and minimally processed. As far as the transition process, where do you actually tell someone to start? I will defer to my colleagues to the right.
I would say the best change that you can advise someone to make is a change that's sustainable for their life. So if they are ready to start having a plant-based breakfast, they can have like oatmeal and fruit. If they're ready to start adding oat milk into their coffee instead of, cow's milk. If they're ready to have meatless Mondays, that's 1/7 of the meat they're swapping out of their diet. If everyone on Earth did that, we would save 13 billion animal lives a year, So it's whatever change they can make at first that's going to be sustainable, that's going to lead to those bigger changes over time.
Absolutely. Okay. First of all, you're going to want all of them to pick up the book Plant-Based Athlete. That is an excellent book. Matt Frazier and Robert Cheek wrote it, and not only does it have a ton of great evidence-based information, but it has real examples of plant-based athletes, and it looks at stuff, you know, you don't necessarily... Anecdotes are dangerous because you don't want to follow what somebody does to a T, because what works for one person may not for another, but it gives, like, what do their diets look like? What's their exercise regimen? How much protein actually, right? So yes, it can sometimes, you know, feel like more work, but you can easily get enough protein. Really awesome example is Shanda Hill. So Shanda Hill just broke all sorts of records. She did 2 back-to-back double decas and won the second one. And she's fully plant-based. And she has done the most long-distance tries out of anybody in 1 year, and she is a phenomenal female athlete. And I just look at her and I'm like, if this woman can, you know, swim 78 kilometers, bike 3,600 kilometers, and then run almost 800 kilometers, and then do that 2 times over on a plant-based diet, I feel like any of us can do it and build muscle. So, and then the other thing I would say is that, you know, when it comes to health outcomes, yes, more whole food the better, but like there's a tipping point around 85%. So for your clients, like whatever that 15% may look like, if they want to have some processed stuff, try and find a clean plant-based protein powder if they don't want to just fill up on hemp hearts and tofu and tempeh and beans and lentils, etc. And then yes, there can be a time and place for some of the processed stuff, and especially if somebody's transitioning and they're like, listen, I don't know if I can go straight from like burgers to tofu. It's like, hey, Beyond Sausages reformulated, it's 40% less saturated fat. You can start putting some of that stuff in. I'm all about the transitioning. Like it's not perfection, it's making the progress. And so if that's what they need to do in order to capture, their protein needs, they should work with dietitians. They can get things like Chronometer, which is a free app. They can see how much protein they get that way. It's absolutely doable. And then what they should also do for inspiration is go on social media if they're of that age where that's something they're interested in, and find as many plant-based athletes as they can and follow them. Because the more you feel like you have a community, the more committed you are, the easier it is. We all need our social circle, right, to like reinvigorate us and inspire us. And there are so many out there that then they don't feel so alone trying to do it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and the other thing is I think that some people like to transition gradually. Another option is to point people to some of the 21-day plant-based trials. Yeah, jump starts. There are lots of them online, and it's interesting. Once people try it, they find that their taste buds shift, and they feel better. So, some people like to do this gradually, make gradual transitions that are sustainable. Some people like to dive in and try it, and sometimes they notice such remarkable changes that they want to stick with it. So there are many ways, I think, to encourage people to make these transitions. Chantelle.
Yeah, Plant University actually has a 21-day plant-based challenge. If you want to send them over there, it's more about finding your why and making those changes gradually that are going to be sustainable for your entire journey. So yeah, it takes 3 weeks to build a habit, they say. So 21 days is a really good place to start.
So I think with that, we'll wrap it up. I want to say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for your questions, and thanks to our technical support for recording this, and we will make it available to those of you who have attended and others you share it with.